Imagine a single voice rising, full of hope, in a world designed to stifle and silence the dreams of those who don't fit in. Picture a moment when everything elegant and privileged stands still, confronted by a young child for whom music is both lifeline and rebellion. A girl whose talent will challenge the very foundations of prejudice, entitlement, and power. The luxurious lobby of the Continental Hotel, adorned with shimmering chandeliers and velvet drapes. It was the season's most exclusive charity gala. Guests dressed in silks and tailored suits, clinking glasses as they mingled, exuding an air of carefree sophistication. Amidst the murmur of laughter and the distant strains of conversation, a small, hesitant voice rippled through the crowd, sharp and clear. "May I play for food?" The words hung in the air, unfamiliar and discordant against the backdrop of expensive champagne and polite networking. Heads turned, whispers faded, and the gathered aristocrats found themselves face to face with a 12-year-old black girl whose presence at their event seemed as unlikely as a thunderstorm on a cloudless day. Amelia Washington stood just inside the grand entrance to the main hall, her wide, searching eyes reflecting the crystal glow of the Steinway grand piano at the room's center. She wore clothes too big for her slender frame, simple, faded, and wholly out of place amidst the shining couture and pristine tuxedos. In her arms, a battered backpack was hugged tightly, more like armor than accessory, the subtle signal of a life that valued survival over style. The guests reacted with a mix of stunned curiosity and growing discomfort as Amelia's gaze settled on the piano. "How did that little girl sneak in here?" came a hissing whisper from a platinum blonde guest, her fingers tense around a champagne flute. Subscribe and hit like. Our powerful stories add years to your life. Join our Story Lovers Club and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? Where's security? Of course, the event was billed as a fundraiser to support disadvantaged youth, a noble cause, at least on the invitation. Amelia, whose last 7 nights had been spent rotating between shelters, understood this irony better than anyone in the room. She'd overheard mention of the event earlier that day when passing the hotel, seized by an unexplainable urge to try and slip inside. Maybe tonight, she thought, her luck would turn. Victoria Sterling, the celebrated event hostess and scion of a storied family fortune, soon approached Amelia, each step deliberate and brimming with the practiced poise of someone accustomed to wielding authority. At 45, Victoria embodied the apex of social refinement. Her education was impeccable, her manners meticulously curated, and her conviction in her moral superiority unyielding. Stopping before Amelia, she favored the child with an icy, patronizing smile. "Darling, this is not the place for someone like you. There's a McDonald's 2 blocks down." "You don't belong here," she said, her words soft yet heavy with dismissal. But Amelia's resolve did not falter. "I just wanted to play," she repeated, her voice gaining strength, as if emboldened by defiance. "Just one song. In exchange, I'd like a meal." The crowd responded with murmured laughter, an uncomfortable ripple that began at the edges of the room and soon grew into a chorus of mockery. "She thinks she can play the piano?" scoffed a sharply dressed man, shaking his head as he eyed Amelia with detached amusement. "She probably doesn't even know what the C key is," another added, her tone dripping with a pretense of pity. "Kids today have wild imaginations. They watch movies and think anything is possible." Yet despite the derision surrounding her, Amelia's posture remained upright, her dignity unbowed. A peculiar composure radiated from her, a silent strength, as if she held knowledge that no one else in this glittering hall could possibly comprehend. In the far corner, Dr. Robert Chun, a renowned pianist and seasoned judge of national competitions, observed the unfolding drama with growing intrigue. Amelia's unwavering focus on the grand piano caught his practiced eye. There was something unusual in how she looked at the instrument. More than simple longing, it was reverence, recognition. This was not mere curiosity. Victoria, noticing Dr. Chun's attention, bristled slightly as he approached. "Perhaps we should let her play. Isn't the purpose of tonight's gala to help talented young people?" Dr. Chun suggested politely. Victoria laughed, her voice as clear and cruel as shattering glass. "Robert, please, look at her. Children like this simply don't have access to music education." "It's impossible." What none in the room knew was that for the first 8 years of her life, music had been inseparable from breathing for Amelia. Her grandmother, Betty Washington, once an aspiring classical pianist denied recognition due to the color of her skin, was Amelia's mentor and inspiration. In the aftermath of her grandmother's death, Amelia found herself adrift within the foster care system, a world that seemed determined to erase every trace of the comfort she once knew. She carried inside her not just the ache of loss, but an extraordinary, unformed talent she barely understood. While the elegantly dressed guests debated her worth and whispered behind manicured hands, Amelia stood fast, her courage forged in fires far hotter than those of mere social rejection. She had survived storms that would have scattered others, and from her own vulnerability, she drew quiet power. Against the swirl of disdain, Amelia's fingers twitched imperceptibly, dancing across imaginary keys in the air. This unconscious habit soothed her in moments of greatest turmoil. A ritual born from countless nights spent finding solace in music that no one else could hear. For those drawn to stories of resilience, of the triumph of dignity and justice over adversity, Amelia's upcoming performance was poised to silence a room brimming with prejudice and reveal a raw, breathtaking talent that would upend all their assumptions about human potential. Victoria Sterling relished the mounting attention. Her arms crossed as she let out a theatrical laugh, an exaggerated gesture meant to signal her total control over the situation. "Very well, dear," she sneered. "If you insist so passionately, let's make it entertaining. But there will be conditions." Now the audience leaned in, the anticipation building for what they hoped would be a spectacle tailored to their amusement. Victoria enjoyed being the architect of these cruel diversions, relishing opportunities to further assert her self-proclaimed virtue before her equally privileged peers. "First condition," Victoria announced, holding up a glimmering finger. "You'll play only one song. Second, if you perform it well enough, I'll personally pay for your dinner." But here she paused theatrically, eyes roaming over the hall as she prepared the final blow. "If you fail, as we all know you will, you'll leave at once and never return to disturb respectable company ever again." A quiet gasp from the back. A single elderly woman's murmured protest was overwhelmed by an avalanche of approving laughter. Amelia's eyes never left the piano, her mind swimming with memories that blended old pain and new resolve. She could almost hear the gentle encouragements of her grandmother, Betty. "When others try to tear you down, let your music speak, my love." The language of music is honest. It knows no prejudice. "I accept," Amelia replied simply, her words ringing with clarity and authenticity. Dr. Chun watched in rapt attention. There was something ineffable about the girl's bearing, a magnetic quality that, after decades of evaluating hundreds of pianists, made him sit forward in anticipation. Victoria clapped her hands briskly, an air of satisfaction dancing in her posture as she looked around for the most challenging piece possible, something designed not just to test, but to ridicule. Fixing her gaze on James Morrison, a local bar pianist known for mediocrity, she called, "James, darling, what should our young artist play tonight?" James grinned, sensing the opportunity for sport. "Let her try Beethoven's Für Elise. Everyone who's ever laid hands on a piano thinks they can play that song." The suggestion set off a new round of laughter. Für Elise was famous for being attempted by countless amateurs. While it seemed simple, its subtle technical demands could trip up even experienced students. For the untrained, it was a trap, too familiar, too easy to reveal flaws. If Amelia knew only rudimentary skills, the piece would expose her immediately. If she knew nothing, she'd flounder from the start. "Perfect!" Victoria proclaimed, clearly pleased. A piece every child who's had basic piano lessons pretends to know. No excuses when she fails. As Amelia moved toward the piano, each measured step seemed to radiate gentle defiance, a quiet determination that unsettled even those watching from the margins. Many sensed that something unusual was unfolding, an undercurrent of dignity that felt out of place against the evening's backdrop of calculated cruelty. When Amelia perched herself on the piano bench, she did so with the practiced, natural accuracy cultivated through years of repetition. She made subtle adjustments to its height, her hands hovering in textbook precision above the keys. Dr. Chun involuntarily shivered. These were gestures of a seasoned pianist, not a child attempting her first notes. Victoria, desperate to maintain narrative control, scoffed to her nearby friends. "Look, she doesn't even know how to sit at a piano. I doubt she's ever played on a real one." But Dr. Chun disagreed entirely. The way Amelia sat, her straight back Her poised fingers hinted at formal training and deep familiarity, skills honed not in privilege, but in devotion and hardship. Amelia's thoughts raced through a tide of personal history, her mind awash in images of her grandmother Betty, one of the first black women in the city to challenge the conservatory system back in the 1960s. Despite unassailable talent, Betty was barred by a wall of prejudice. She instead transformed her modest home into a haven for neighborhood children, introducing them to the world of classical music with patient wisdom and gentle love. "Music is a universal language, Amelia," her grandmother would say, guiding her tiny fingers across faded keys. "If you play from the heart, your audience listens with their soul, not with their eyes." Amelia had spent countless hours nested beside her grandmother's upright piano, learning more than scales and technique. She absorbed a philosophy of musical expression that transcended mere sound. Betty's teaching was a lifeline, a portal to a world of boundless possibility, one that was sealed away when she died, leaving Amelia to navigate the gray loneliness of foster care. As the guests simmered with impatience, Victoria drummed her manicured nails, eager for Amelia to begin, convinced she had orchestrated a scene of humiliation so perfect it would confirm all her worst assumptions. But as Amelia settled her hands onto the Steinway's keys, a rush of energy surged through her, electrifying memory and raw anticipation. Months had passed since she'd touched a real instrument, and now even the feeling of the ivories under her fingers was like rediscovering a vital part of herself. She took a deep breath, the air charged with promise. The first note fell, a crystalline sound more pure and confident than anyone expected. Heads turned. The crowd, expecting childish fumbling, sensed something had shifted. It was not the awkward fumbling of a novice. It was the introduction of an artist, each note deliberate, compelling, and acute. Dr. Chun, now drawn fully into Amelia's orbit, inched forward among the captivated listeners. The technical precision with which she delivered that first note dazzled him. Sharp attack, nuanced sustain, careful touch, hallmarks not of privilege, but of rare and disciplined talent. Such a display could only spring from years immersed in music's intricacies. Victoria murmured, trying desperately to explain away the anomaly. Must be luck. No child in her position could possibly achieve this. But with every phrase Amelia played, a transformation occurred, both in her own soul and in the heart of every onlooker. Her interpretation of Fur Elysée was not only technically correct, it sang with a depth of emotion that silenced even the most skeptical guest. The music flowing from her hands was nothing less than miraculous, a statement of identity, history, and hope, woven into each shimmering note. As Amelia played, the entire atmosphere of the Continental Hotel shifted, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the emergence of something truly extraordinary. The brittle tension that had hung in the air, stoked by ridicule and arrogance, gradually dissolved into breathless awe. Her music possessed a power that went beyond mere accuracy or showmanship. Through every phrase, she conveyed longing, resilience, and unspoken love. The crowd, once restless and mocking, now stood captivated, each patron tethered to the song as though spellbound by an ancient incantation. Dr. Chun, whose decades of experience had made him a seasoned skeptic, felt chills run along his arms as he listened. There was a rare humility in Amelia's artistry, born of hardship and refined in solitude. Each dynamic swell and every tender pause was a window into Amelia's soul, unfolding the story of her journey far more poignantly than any words ever could. But Victoria's face was frozen in a brittle mask, her pride at war with the truth blooming before her eyes. Her friends, equally shaken, exchanged glances laden with disbelief, questions flickering behind carefully curated expressions. None of them had expected this, least of all Victoria, who had never doubted her own perceptions of worthiness and talent. Meanwhile, a transformation occurred within the crowd, where earlier tongues wagged with derision. The guests now turned their attention inward, confronting their biases and discomforts. They saw before them a child who, by every societal measure, should have failed. Yet here she was, weaving beauty from adversity, her fingers summoning not just music, but also humility and empathy from the audience. The room's opulence seemed to pale in comparison to the richness of Amelia's performance. The plush carpets and gold-trimmed curtains rendered meaningless by the authenticity of her sound. The last section of Fur Elise, the most technically demanding, where many hopefuls faltered, rose and fell beneath Amelia's hands with heartbreaking clarity. The speed and intensity of her playing mirrored the fusion of pain and hope inside her, a desperate wish to be heard, to find belonging, and to reclaim a piece of the dignity that had been denied her for so long. As the final notes lingered in the charged silence, the spell remained unbroken. For a long, precious moment, nobody moved. Dr. Chun, entranced, let a single tear escape, a tribute that did not go unnoticed by those around him. Even the grand hotel, with its storied walls and silent histories, seemed to hum in gentle acknowledgement. Within that fleeting eternity, distinctions of wealth, background, and color seemed irrelevant, supplanted by awe and quiet reverence. Amelia sat motionless for a brief instant, fingers trembling ever so slightly, as if reluctant to release the spell she had cast. The audience, likewise suspended between disbelief and exhilaration, erupted into applause so sudden and overwhelming that it startled even the most jaded among them. No longer polite, obligatory clapping, this was a standing ovation, driven by genuine wonder and humbled respect. At first, Victoria Sterling attempted to maintain her composure, pasting a brittle smile onto her lips as she measured her response, with eyes darting from Amelia to her peers. But soon, she found herself overtaken by the rising tide of applause. Even she could not deny what the entire hall had just experienced. Something unteachable, unmistakable, and unrepeatable. It was as though the walls, separating the privileged and the dispossessed, had momentarily vanished. Several guests approached Amelia instinctively, moved by an impulse to thank her, to offer what little comfort or praise they could muster. Some standard over themselves, apologizing for their earlier doubts. A few, seeking redemption, pressed business cards into her small, hesitant hands, promising support or mentorship. But Amelia remained humble, thanking each person with quiet gratitude. Her eyes still shining with the echo of her song, scanned the crowd, searching for a trace of her grandmother's spirit, a sense that she had truly honored Betty's legacy. Chun was among the first to reach Amelia's side. Crouching beside her, he spoke softly, his voice trembling. "You have done something tonight that few adults ever achieve. Your music carries a lifetime of feeling. Where did you learn to play like this?" Amelia told her story, voice barely above a whisper, about her grandmother's devotion and the makeshift lessons in a modest apartment. She spoke of Betty's sacrifices, of her belief in the transformative power of music, and of a promise made at her bedside that Amelia would always play, no matter the cost. The story unfolded between them like a private confession. Yet those closest to the scene heard enough to understand the magnitude of what had just transpired. Amelia's words brought tears to several listeners' eyes, offering a glimpse of a woman whose memory now shone through every note. Victoria, who had orchestrated the public ordeal, now found herself in a moral crossroads. The carefully constructed facade of benevolence and superiority, her belief in knowing exactly which children deserve opportunity, was collapsing under the weight of Amelia's example. Unable to summon her usual veneer of authority, Victoria looked around the room for support, only to find that the power balance had subtly, irreversibly shifted. The guests no longer regarded her opinions as gospel. Instead, their loyalty and respect gravitated toward the unassuming girl at the piano. Swallowing her pride with visible difficulty, Victoria rose and approached Amelia, her tone hesitant, almost pleading. "I must admit, I misjudged you. Your performance was astonishing. You've reminded all of us that true talent, real merit, has nothing to do with where you're from or what you look like. I owe you an apology, and perhaps a chance to help you further. It was an imperfect redemption, tinged with an awkwardness that betrayed Victoria's discomfort. But for the first time in years, she was compelled to listen rather than dictate. Her self-image cracked open by humility. Several guests nodded in agreement, murmuring their own apologies. While Amelia accepted Victoria's words graciously, she did so not with triumph, but with a weary understanding. Even sincere transformation begins as a slow, halting process. Dr. Chun, his interest piqued beyond simple curiosity, turned to Victoria. "This young lady deserves a real chance. I know people at the conservatory. If Amelia is open to it, I will personally see that she auditions. She has a gift that must be nurtured. The hall buzzed with a new kind of excitement, different from the anxious energy of an hour before. Gone was the brittle condescension, replaced by a spirit of hope, possibility, and genuine connection. Amelia, for the first time in her young life, felt the unfamiliar warmth of being at the center of celebration, rather than pity. The aftermath of the performance unfolded into a cascade of opportunities and promises. Dr. Chun immediately reached out to his network, contacting the city's most respected music foundations and arranging for Amelia to be granted both an audition and professional lessons. Funds that had, until then, languished in bureaucratic limbo were earmarked not just for Amelia, but also for youth from similarly disadvantaged neighborhoods. Victoria Sterling, shaken from her old habits, but determined to do right, worked behind the scenes to ensure Amelia's story became the highlight of the charity's annual report. She leveraged her influence to connect Amelia with supportive patrons, ensuring she would lack for neither encouragement nor resources in the months to come. Through all this, Amelia remained grounded. She continued to practice whenever she could, pouring her experiences, her losses, hopes, and triumphs into every note she played. Her fame grew steadily, not just for her technical prowess, but for the emotional truth she brought to each performance. She became a living testament to her grandmother's wisdom. Play from the heart, and the world cannot help but listen. Meanwhile, children from her old neighborhood and former foster homes watched as Amelia broke new ground. Some adults, once cynical about change, found themselves volunteering or donating in Amelia's name, realizing that one act of courage, fueled by artistry and resilience, could ripple outward with lasting effect. As the seasons changed and Amelia's renown spread, her life became a bridge between worlds. She learned to navigate the concert halls and conservatories, the rarefied spaces into which she'd once been denied entry, with the same humility and compassion that had shaped her from childhood. For every accolade she received, she made a point to return to the city's shelters, playing for children who, like her, had once been invisible. Occasionally, Victoria Sterling attended these recitals, bearing gifts, but learning most from simply listening. She had become a quieter presence, no longer demanding the spotlight, content to observe and support rather than steer. Her transformation was imperfect, but real, a journey that mirrored in its own way Amelia's movement from isolation to acceptance. Dr. Chun, now one of Amelia's closest mentors, took joy in guiding her development alongside the city's elite musicians. Under his tutelage, her gift blossomed into artistry of rare depth. But more than skill, Amelia retained her capacity for wonder, humility, and empathy. In interviews, she spoke always of her grandmother, her first teacher, her truest inspiration, and reminded crowds that music's purpose transcended mere entertainment. Music is for healing, for remembering, for bringing people together, Amelia would say, her eyes shining. Even when the world tries to divide us, A single melody can remind us that we are part of something greater. By the time Amelia made her first appearance on the national stage, her story had become legend, a tale of unlikely triumph that reverberated far beyond the elegant halls of the Continental Hotel. Every performance was more than a concert. It was an invitation for the privileged to open their hearts, for the lost to find hope, for everyone, regardless of station, to share in the universal gift of music. The night Amelia first played at the Continental Hotel had rippled outward in ways that no one present could have foreseen. News outlets picked up her story, not as a mere novelty or footnote, but as a testimony to the transforming power of art and the resilience of spirit. Journalists wrote of the young prodigy who, armed with nothing but courage and the memory of her grandmother, had shattered the barriers of class and prejudice in a single, unforgettable recital. For Amelia, the sudden attention brought both opportunities and challenges. Interviews and invitations poured in from every corner of the city. Gala organizers competed to have her perform. Conservatories scrambled to send offers, and donations to youth music programs spiked, a visible measure of the change she had inspired. Yet, beneath the swirl of new prospects, Amelia remained fiercely loyal to her roots and her promise to Betty Washington. Each request for her story brought fresh waves of emotion, pride in her success, gratitude for the doors opened, but also a subtle undertow of anxiety. She worried about being tokenized, about becoming a symbol rather than a person. Quiet moments found her wrestling with fears that she would be paraded as an example, her struggles painted over by narratives of overnight redemption. Dr. Chun noticed this internal struggle, and as he nurtured her talent, helped her navigate the complexities of fame, always encouraging her to speak her truth. Struck by a need for authenticity, Amelia began each public recital by sharing a few words about her grandmother. She described Betty's grace under pressure, her stubborn refusal to retreat in the face of institutional exclusion, and how music had helped them communicate love without speaking. Audience members responded with tears and standing ovations, not just for the music, but for the sincerity and humanity at its heart. Amelia's story, now amplified by her voice, became more than headlines. It became a beacon for those searching for dignity and belonging. With each passing month, Amelia matured, not just musically, but emotionally and intellectually. She learned to wield her influence carefully, understanding that music's power lay in its capacity to unite, not to impress. Her recitals became communal events, celebrations of diversity and solidarity. On stage, she invited children from various backgrounds to join her, ensuring that the spotlight never remained solely on her. These collaborations blossomed into a shifting tapestry of sound, mixing classical pieces with spirituals and contemporary works. In doing so, Amelia challenged not only the boundaries of genre, but also the social divisions that kept people apart. The press followed her journey with keen interest. Profiles highlighted how her success had led to investments in public music education, scholarships for minority students, and the creation of safe spaces for artistic exploration. Old assumptions about who could excel at classical music were now openly questioned, and new role models begun to emerge from backgrounds previously ignored or dismissed. Victoria Sterling, for her part, continued her personal transformation. She made it her mission to learn from the very people she'd once dismissed, attending workshops about systemic inequality and listening, genuinely listening, to the experiences of those historically excluded from privilege. Through awkward conversations and humbling admissions of ignorance, she grew softer, more self-aware. No longer did she see herself as a gatekeeper. Instead, she saw her role as facilitator, empowering others rather than defending narrow standards. Dr. Chun thrived in this new climate. He assembled a cohort of instructors, diverse in heritage and outlook, to teach in city shelters and foster homes. The conservatory, once an exclusive fortress, opened its doors wider than ever before. Amelia became the unofficial ambassador for these reforms, her input guiding policy and curriculum as leaders sought greater cultural sensitivity. As the city evolved, her presence was a constant reminder that genuine progress is forged not through charity alone, but through real listening, persistent advocacy, and honest reckoning with the past. Amelia's rise to fame did not shield her from the day-to-day challenges of growing up. If anything, she found herself grappling with problems unique to a life suddenly in the public eye. The pressure to perform, the expectations of mentors and supporters, and the longing for her grandmother's quiet reassurance could sometimes feel overwhelming. Late at night, she would sit alone at a piano, first in shelters, later in her own modest apartment, channeling her emotions into music. Her nightly practice became a ritual of healing. Sometimes she played lullabies for herself, inventing melodies based on fragments of memory. Other nights found her lost in improvisation, using the instrument as a vessel for grief, longing, and hope. The catharsis of music allowed her to endure loneliness, confusion, and exhaustion, granting her the capacity to rise again with resilience and grace. The city's children, many of whom had begun to idolize Amelia, sought her counsel. She visited schools and community centers, answering questions not only about technique, but also about perseverance. "How did you keep going when things seemed impossible?" one child asked during a library visit. Amelia paused before answering, her expression thoughtful. "Music gave me a way to tell my story when words weren't enough. I kept going because I believed my story mattered, and because my grandmother never let me forget it. Sometimes all you need is one person to believe, and then you learn to believe in yourself." Her words echoed through the city. Lessons bloom, providing solace and encouragement to those struggling for visibility. More importantly, Amelia modeled a different kind of hero, not one untouched by struggle, but one who triumphs by embracing vulnerability and forging beauty out of adversity. The city itself had changed. Cultural institutions began to reconsider their hiring practices and outreach policies. Diversity festivals attracted larger crowds, celebrating the music, art, and customs of every community represented in Amelia's story. Musicians and artists from marginalized backgrounds were given spaces to shine. Their work finally honored, not as exception, but as essential threads in the city's fabric. Amelia watched this transformation with cautious optimism. She was invited to participate in think tanks and advisory boards, her insight valued as the organizers reshaped old programs. She traveled further afield, collaborating with renowned artists in distant cities, always returning home to share what she had learned. No matter how bright the spotlight, she remained tied to her community, a living reminder that true greatness demands humility, gratitude, and service. Even the Continental Hotel reinvented its gala. The event, once marked by superficial displays of charity, was now driven by stories of impact and opportunity. The children highlighted in their programs included not only those with tragic circumstances, but those with remarkable dreams and ambitions. Amelia ensured that her own story was portrayed honestly, complexity and imperfections included, focusing on the lessons learned and the hope discovered in unexpected places. Victoria Sterling, once emblematic of exclusivity, now sponsored a series of scholarships for artists from underrepresented communities. She credited Amelia for teaching her the value of openness, persistence, and moral courage. Over dinners and quiet conversations, she admitted to Amelia that the night of the performance had marked the beginning of her real education. "It's not enough to give money, or even advice," Victoria said. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is yield space and listen. You've changed my perspective on everything, from music to leadership and even to friendship." Betty Washington's legacy was honored in the most unexpected ways. The City Council voted to establish the Betty Washington Music Fellowship, aimed at supporting young musicians who, regardless of income or background, demonstrated a passion for learning and growth. The fellowship provided not just funding, but mentors, instruments, and community, ensuring that the exclusion Betty once faced would never again be suffered in silence. Amelia was named the program's honorary first fellow. She accepted the title not for the prestige, but for the chance to continue her grandmother's work. Each year, she led masterclasses for fellowship recipients, sharing the philosophy that had guided both her and Betty. Play from your heart, serve with humility, and let your story be heard. Families across the city, regardless of race or status, came to see music as not merely a pastime, but as a sacred right, an opportunity to express the fullness of their lives. The tale of Amelia and Betty became a regular feature in classrooms and grant proposals. Cited as proof that transformative change is possible, when the voices of the marginalized are respected and embraced. As Amelia looked out at the stage on the fellowship's opening night, she saw children from every walk of life ready to audition. She thought of her grandmother, whose hopes had once been dismissed by an indifferent world, and realized those dreams were now alive in each eager face before her. The music began, and with every note that echoed through the hall, the promise was renewed. That every story matters. Every talent deserves a chance. And every heart can find a place in the symphony of life. As the years slipped by, Amelia's influence deepened, extending well beyond the grand stages and into the most overlooked corners of society. Her public stature as a performer was rivaled only by her private dedication. She tirelessly advocated for fostering environments where every young person, regardless of circumstance, could discover and develop their gifts. Community music schools, bearing Amelia's and Betty's names, sprang up throughout the city. These schools became gathering places where children and families of every background could congregate, learn, and share their stories through art. Volunteers included those who had been touched by Amelia's performances, local musicians who understood the isolating sting of prejudice, and teachers keen to follow in the steps of an unlikely role model. The schools featured annual showcases where the students performed before packed crowds, their joy palpable, their nervousness quickly swept away by applause and encouragement. Amelia herself attended every showcase she could, listening attentively to each note, offering words of kindness and gentle critique. She often stayed late into the evening, answering questions or playing informal duets with the most hesitant children, teaching by example what it meant to show up with both skill and compassion. Many who once doubted the value of such inclusion now became the strongest advocates. Parents from privileged neighborhoods found themselves cheering for children whose backgrounds they had never before understood or even acknowledged. Neighborhood boundaries faded, replaced by new alliances forged not on status, but on shared admiration and mutual support. Watching from the sidelines, Dr. Chun felt a quiet pride mixed with humility. He reflected often on the night at the Continental Hotel, when he had first witnessed Amelia's ability to disarm and galvanize an entire room. Now, he saw that single night not as the culmination, but as the beginning of a movement. One child's courage, rooted in years of invisible struggle, had sparked a transformation echoing far beyond any solitary spotlight. Amelia's journey was not without its setbacks. Public scrutiny brought moments of pain, the media hungry for scandal or sensational detail, sometimes twisted her words or overlooked her intentions. There were times when she questioned her endurance, when the expectations placed upon her shoulders seemed heavier than anything one person should bear. She found herself wrestling with moments of inadequacy and exhaustion, haunted by doubts familiar to anyone who has been thrust into the role of symbol. Sometimes she worried that she could never live up to the legacy she'd inherited, or that her efforts would never be enough to dismantle deeply embedded systems of exclusion and indifference. In her lowest moments, Amelia called upon the lessons her grandmother had instilled. She surrounded herself with a circle of confidants: Dr. Chun, Victoria, now transformed into a true friend and ally, and a handful of other musicians who helped her remember that even in solitude, art offered solace. These friends encouraged her to embrace rest, reminding her that self-compassion was just as crucial as empathy for others. She resumed journaling, chronicling not only her victories, but also her fears and failures. These honest accounts later formed the basis of a memoir that resonated with people across the world: young musicians, social workers, parents, and teachers alike. The letters she received in response often moved her to tears, each one a reminder that the very act of witnessing one another's struggles is itself an act of healing and solidarity. Through this process, Amelia came to understand that building a better world was not a sprint, but a relay. Each generation carries the baton for a while, then passes it forward with hope. What mattered most was showing up again and again, even when weary, even if perfection seemed out of reach. The music continued, and with it, the healing and the hope. International opportunities emerged. Amelia was invited to perform in concert halls from Paris to Tokyo, each time sharing pieces by composers who had been overlooked or forgotten, as well as her grandmother's favorites. Audiences across nations found themselves captivated not merely by her musicianship, but by the story she brought with her. A story of possibility, reparative justice, and deep, persistent faith. With each trip abroad, Amelia collected new stories and shared them at home, enriching the curriculum of her community schools. She forged global partnerships, organizing youth music exchanges that allowed children from her city to travel and learn alongside their peers around the world. These exchanges became transformative journeys, broadening perspectives and planting connections that would last a lifetime. Back at home, the fellowship in Betty Washington's name expanded. It began awarding grants not just for classical musicianship, but for songwriting, jazz, hip-hop, and spoken word. Every genre recognized as worthy of nurturing. Amelia welcomed this evolution. She understood that true justice in art meant dismantling narrow hierarchies and allowing every voice to rise. Her annual returns to the Continental Hotel stood as a joyful ritual. Each year, she greeted the staff and event planners as old friends and took her seat at the very same Steinway where her journey had reached a turning point. The charity gala transformed into a festival of possibility, with young performers of every background, mentors like Dr. Chun, and former skeptics who now cheered the program's success. Even Victoria Sterling, once synonymous with exclusion. Do people believe that when people believe, animals like them do not seem to exist as less than welcome? She traveled to schools, libraries, and community centers, leading workshops on using the arts as a form of resistance and storytelling. Every time you tell your story, you honor those who came before and inspire those who will come after, she would say at the start of each workshop. Art is not just about beauty, it's about truth and connection. She fostered intergenerational collaborations, bringing together elders and youth to share songs, poems, and wisdom. These gatherings became treasured interludes of remembrance and imagination, healing old wounds and forging new alliances. Families reunited around the piano. Children recorded interviews with grandparents, and the city's cultural tapestry grew richer and stronger than ever. Amelia's approach was always holistic. She understood that changing a single heart often required changing the conditions of a whole community. She worked with city leaders to ensure not just access to music, but also to meals, safe spaces, housing, and education, addressing the interconnected barriers that once shaped her own childhood. On evenings when she returned to her quiet apartment, Amelia played privately, sometimes improvising, sometimes simply basking in silence. She kept a photo of Betty Washington atop her own piano, surrounded by thank you notes from students and letters from families she had helped. The legacy her grandmother started, one of quiet defiance and luminous hope, continued in new and unexpected forms, each variation its own testament to the enduring power of love and art. Years later, an older Amelia stood backstage during another packed gala at the Continental Hotel, the same dazzling space where her path had first collided with privilege and skepticism. Now, though, she was surrounded by protégés, friends, and a community transformed by decades of listening, learning, and fearless creativity. As she prepared to perform, she closed her eyes and remembered that trembling, hungry girl who had once dared to request a place at the piano. The memory did not fill her with regret, but with boundless gratitude for every act of kindness, every hard-earned lesson, every voice that had joined her in turning the page. The staff dimmed the lights. The crowd quieted. An audience of every imaginable background gathered in anticipation, many now friends and collaborators. Amelia approached the piano, her fingers brushing the keys with reverence, her heart swelling with the stories and struggles that had shaped her. In her opening remarks, she spoke as always for those who still hovered at the margins, reminding everyone that music is more than a performance. It is an invitation, a bridge, and a celebration of every life story, no matter how humble. Tonight, she began, her voice clear and steady, we honor every hand that made this music possible. We play for the hungry, the lost, the overlooked, and the dreaming. Let every note remind us there is always room in this world for another voice in the song. With that, she began to play. The room filled with sound and memory and hope that reached far beyond the hotel's walls. A triumphant, resounding proof that by daring to be heard, we can change not just our own fates, but the fate of an entire community. And so Amelia's story, inscribed in music and memory, lived on, an eternal chorus, calling others to find their courage, to take up their psalm, and to believe always in the quiet, irrevocable promise of belonging.